also finding that there's these tar pits at Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, how does God choose to punish Sodom and Gomorrah? Does anybody remember? What does He rain down? What happens when you miss fire and tar and oil and gas? How does that go? Do you think that's intentional? I think that nugget is put here to show us, keep this in the back of your mind, because this is where that is heading. Look with me at verse 12. This is where we see the relevance of these 11 verses to the story of Abram. They also took, verse 11. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, all their provisions, and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. So essentially what these 4 kings are doing, they're going to the 5 other kings and their people who aren't paying tribute, and they're taking even more. They said, the tribute is so we don't punish you and don't kill you. So now, since you didn't pay, we're going to expect you to pay even more. And in the process, innocent people get swept up in the crosshairs, as still happens every time there's a war, every time nations can't get along. And we're told this time that when the enemy's taking possessions and people, they take Lot, the nephew of Abram. And where was Lot dwelling at the time? In Sodom. That's significant, okay? That when Abram and Lot separate, where does Lot settle? He settles outside of Sodom. And this takes place over about a 14-year period, as verses 1 through 8 lay out. So over the course of 14 years, that's a pretty significant length of time, isn't it? The idea, you can almost picture Lot just slowly being seduced, where he starts off separate from Sodom, and he observes Sodom and its customs and its ways, and just slowly over time, step closer, until ultimately he has found his home in a very wicked and perverse place. A place he never should have been to begin with. And yet, does that mean the story of Lot is over? Most certainly not. If you remember, one of the promises, and this is going to be important again later in this chapter, one of the promises God makes to Abram is, everyone who blesses you, what will I do? What does He say? I will bless. Everyone who curses you, what will I do? I'll curse. What do we know about Lot? Did he bless Abram? Does he honor Abram? Yes. We're going to see Lot actually isn't that admirable of a man, or at least we get a picture of him in a very, very compromised situation that doesn't make him look good at all. And yet we find that God goes to such great lengths to rescue this man. Why? Well, we find that God is being faithful to the promise He made to Abram, that those who bless you, I'm going to bless. And we know that, of course, has relevance to Jesus Christ and the new covenant in Him, that it operates the same way. Those who bless Jesus Christ, what does God do? He blesses. Those who curse Him will be cursed. And so it is today. So let's continue on. This scene, it's not really a VBS story. It's not a story where you really teach children. But it's a story that really needs to be made into like a really cool movie, because what we're going to find here sounds straight out of an action movie. Verse 13, the ones who had escaped, that is the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah, they came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living in the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and Aner. These were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. So Abram, you don't picture Abram as a feeble old man, do you? When Abram gets the news that his beloved nephew Lot, has been swept away in this conflict, he doesn't cry. He doesn't sit back and complain about how bad he has it. He says, I'm just going to call my own little personal militia. We're going to have what type of man would have the capacity to train, to sustain an army of over 300 men for your own personal use? And we find here that that's exactly the situation Abram finds himself in. Verse 15, he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them north possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. So I love so often in Bible study how understated the Bible is. It just says something that's a complete miracle, miraculous. 318 men is nothing in comparison to 4 kings and their armies joined together, right? And Abraham leads a surprise attack, 300 men, and it says he gets back every possession, every person, every woman, every child, and his nephew Lot. So we're supposed to see here that is this something Abram did in his own might and his own power? Absolutely not. It would literally be impossible. A man aspiring to do what Abram just did in his own strength would be slaughtered. And yet we find the Lord's blessing is upon him. So before we get into this next section, it's going to continue these thoughts. Any questions or comments?
Well, just a few chapters back, we seen that he was scared when they went into Egypt.
That's right.
They killed him. And who's the one that put the fear into that Egyptian? It was God with those plagues.
That's right.
He told him, he said, man, what have you done to us? He said, get your wife, get out of here.
Yeah.
Because of what the Lord's doing to us. It wasn't that he was scared of Abraham. It's the fact that he was scared that the Lord was with Abraham and what was happening to him because of what he done to Abraham.
That's right. And God is displaying to everybody. This is Canaanite cities which are famous for paganism, okay? And this is when we talk about like child sacrifice, when we talk about Baal or Baal, however you want to say it, B-A-A-L, the pagan god. You talk about sacrifices to Molech. This is where very famously children would be slaughtered at his temple. This all takes place in this region, okay? There's extreme wickedness. And I'll put my cards on the table. That's probably not a very good metaphor to use. But you understand what I'm saying. I'll be up front that I believe that a lot of what we see in pagan idolatry in the Old Testament is actually demonic. That's what's actually behind these forces and attacks. So when God is intentionally choosing an elderly old man with no kids and saying, through your seed, I'm going to bless the world, 100 men and overthrows armies of 4 kingdoms combined, do you think God is trying to send a message? In this region, to this people where there's so much false teaching, there's so much pagan practices, God is trying to demonstrate who the one true Lord actually is. Let's continue on. Verse 17. After his return from the defeat, does someone want to take a shot at that?
I'd say Cheddar Lelmer.
That's what Jerry said, and I'm going with it. And the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom, went out to meet him at the valley of Shevev, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. Okay, so keep in mind that the distance that Abram and his men travel is well over 100 miles. You think in the day and age where all transport is on foot, and you're not just transporting yourself, but 318 men plus animals and resources and supplies. It's estimated that in this time, an army like this could travel somewhere between 15 to 20 miles a day if they're lucky. So you think if you're traveling about 120 miles, you're talking about days, if not weeks long trip. So on after his return, and that's no small feat. The idea is it takes you maybe a couple weeks to get there. You have a battle. It takes you a couple weeks to get back. The idea is you would be exhausted, okay? You'd be drained. But when he returns at the valley of Shevev, he is met by first the king of Sodom, and he's met by a man named Melchizedek. This is the reason I decided to slow down a little tonight and not rush through chapter 14, because this is typically a character and a place that raises a lot of questions and has a lot of relevance to the New Testament, and I want to make sure we look at that together. But Melchizedek, have we heard anything about this man before? No. Do we hear anything in Genesis about him again? The answer is no. So, where in the world does Melchizedek come from? Well, that's a good question. But just look here and we'll make a few observations. Melchizedek, the name literally means king of righteousness. It says Melchizedek is the king of a city named Salem, and that is the city that later gets renamed Jerusalem. Have you ever heard of that place? It's pretty significant in Jewish and biblical and even Christian history. So the idea is this is a king who's the king of righteousness. Shalem, which is the same root word as shalom, means what? I know you know what shalom means. Peace. That is the root word that is built around Jerusalem, which means the city of peace. So, are we supposed to see that this is a